Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Vasquez here, and today is November 12th, and I've been quite busy for the last month, so I haven't had time to review this Medscape article video item that they put out. I saw it come out about a month ago. It says October 12th, so it was exactly 1 month ago. And here we are on November 12th, and today's the first time I've had a chance to kind of get a little bit organized. I mean, at least marginally organized enough to review this. So I haven't looked at it. I don't know what she says. Her name's Joanne E. Manson, MD, DRPH. So presumably, I guess that means she has a doctorate in pharmacy or pharmacology. So I don't expect this to go very well. For those of you who like Pollyanna bullshit, you know that I'm not your source for that. I am your source for honest reviews of research. So we're about to do an honest review of this research, and I'm going to give you my honest opinion. I don't care who this lady is on a personal level. I do care who she is if she's putting out bad data and misleading people, because that has consequences for millions of people, millions of patients, and hundreds of thousands of doctors out there who are presumably trying to do good work, and they get misled by these big institutions and big names who publish in big journals, and that's a disservice to humanity. So I don't know if that's what she's going to, play out in her 7-minute discussion of whatever she's going to discuss. But my suspicion is that this is going to be a big ball of official elite bullshit. And that's my prejudgment. So that's my prejudice going into this. My prejudice going into this is that this is going to be just a big ball of bullshit coming from this lady. She's an MD, double doctorate in whatever. So you can see on the page, so this is called a commentary. This is published on Medscape. This goes out to about probably 100 million or millions of people, probably, mostly doctors and researchers. So this is called Vitamin D, Recent Findings and Implications for Clinical Practice. Again, this was exactly 1 month ago. I haven't looked at what she said. I haven't had time to support my perspective because I don't know what my perspective is going to be. We're going to watch this video together, and I'm sure it'll be more painful for me than it will be for you. Her name is Dr. Joanne Manson, professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. So that sounds like a big damn deal. And so let's find out. Let's find out if she knows what the hell she's talking about, because I suspect that she's not going to know what the hell she's talking about. So, like I said, I haven't done any background research on this piece because I haven't even read it. I read half of the first paragraph and that was it. So for example, she says, I'd like to talk to you about the recent research, particularly randomized clinical trials, which they fucked those things up so bad that they design those studies to get whatever they want. And she's a perfect example of that. So like I said, again, for at least the third time, I didn't really know who she was, but I thought I recognized her name. And sure enough, I went back and looked at some of my own files, and I see that she was an author. She authored this paper in 2018 in Journal of the American Medical Association. And this is just such a classic American Medical Association piece of garbage. And so, like I said, I started realizing that her name was a little bit familiar just because I've seen some of the garbage that she's written. And this article is one of them. Vitamin and mineral supplements, what clinicians need to know. This was published in JAMA in 2018. So some of you who have watched my videos and followed my work at some level noticed that 2018 was a really remarkable year in the world of research. In 2018, medicine started to go completely off the rails. So, and I'm not saying that it only started in 2018. It started, it's been kind of a progressive thing. I noticed, for example, a huge departure of medicine and politics. I noticed in 2014 when every day we internationally were just getting hit with viruses and measles and the need for vaccines and all this crazy stuff. I mean, it was just crazy. 2014 was a really decisive year for the politicalization or politicization of medicine. Uh, Politics became very medical, medicine became very political in a way that was just crazy. Like stuff just wasn't making sense anymore. So you can go back. So 2014, that was around the time that they did the whole Ebola thing, which turned out to be a big fraud that corresponded, in the United States anyway, it corresponded perfectly with a certain influence that they were trying to push on elections. And as soon as those elections happened, Ebola disappeared from the news. So what was going on? They were just trying to make people afraid so they would vote in a certain pattern. When people are afraid, they vote differently from when they feel secure or happy or are thinking about other things like education. Sorry, I'm gonna have to argue with this sweater a little bit. I keep putting the collar down and the collar keeps popping up. You see that? It drives me nuts. So there. This is how I want this shirt to look, or this sweater to look, but the collar keeps popping up and it drives me nuts. It looks way too 80s for me, so. So 2014 was a crazy year and things only got worse after that, but remarkably worse. For me, somebody who looks at research, and I've looked at research from the first, at least semester, let's say, from the first semester that I started graduate studies, that was in 1992, I believe. I was just a research fiend. I used to skip class. So I was in graduate school, but like once I got into the idea of research and like looking at data, I would skip class to hang out in the library and photocopy articles. Very few of us have done that. I know that I did. I'm quite sure that Jeffrey Bland did. I know for sure that Alan Gaby did the same thing, because he used to talk about it a little bit, and how he used to spend hours just going through journals, and I did the same thing, just going through journals, like page by page. We're not talking like digital searches, because this was 91 or 92. Digital searches really didn't exist back then. So for those of us who were looking at research, pre-internet, we did it manually. We spent hours in the library going through journals, starting at volume 1 and going just turning pages, looking for anything related to nutrition or anything of interest. And that's a distinction that a lot of people don't realize, because they don't have the experience. And the difference that I'm present to is the distinction between searching versus just exploring and browsing. So for example, like if you go to a bookstore, you'll find stuff in a bookstore that you would never encounter if you go to a digital bookstore or if you look online for something. If you look online for something, you've already narrowed the field because you're looking for something specific, right? If I do a search, see how this collar keeps popping up? Drives me nuts. If you do a search for something, or if I do a search for something online, I've already limited the field of reality into whatever my search parameters are. If I look for autoimmune disease and vitamin D, well, guess what? I'm going to find autoimmune articles and vitamin D articles, right? If I just go to the library, or if I just go to a bookstore, which I used to do, even when I still lived in Houston, I used to go to Half Price Books and just look, because I used to go to the Half Price Books location, which was right next to the Texas Medical Center. So I would go there and just be, inundated, so to speak, with all of these old medical books. But again, the point that I'm making is searching for something, by definition, you know what you're looking for, and you are searching for 1 plus 2 plus 3 or whatever. You're searching for something specific. If you go to a library or you go to a bookstore and you're just browsing, you never know what you're going to find, right? And so that actually, if you do it enough, eventually you'll find stuff that no one else may have seen in decades because it's an old book. I've got lots of old books. Even my mouse pad, for example. I mean, this is an old book that I got discarded from a medical library. It's called The Medical Trust Unmasked. And what it is, this is true. I mean, look at this. This is what I use for my mouse pad. You can see it's kind of worn out, but it's the perfect size for a mouse pad, so that's what I use. But basically what this is photocopies of documents from the American Medical Association of how they tried to destroy, the practice of nutrition, and how they tried to destroy chiropractic, for example. And these are their documents, and kind of false, what would be called these days misinformation or false information or fake news or whatever. So this is just an example. It happens to be on my desk because, like I said, I use this as my mouse pad. But it's an example of going to bookstores, going to libraries, and searching for things that you would never even know existed. So you wouldn't even know to really search for them. You just find them when you go to a bookstore or a library, instead of doing a digital search where you're only going to find the things that match the terms that you already have in your head. So anyway, as I was starting to say, from the time I started studying anything at the graduate level, actually a little bit before that, but certainly by the time 1992 rolled around and I was in graduate school for real, I was just a research fiend. And so the perspective that provides me is that I was able to notice deviations from the norm very early. When I saw the language in research was changing, a lot of times I or people like me would look at an article and say, well, that's kind of an outlier. But the field, so to speak, of medicine and science was still legit. In 2014 up to 2018, 2019, things were just going off the rails. And 2018 was a really, really, really bad year for cardiovascular research and fish oil research and vitamin D research. So when I was looking at this news blog thing that Medscape put out, Medscape puts out a lot of garbage. It's mostly propaganda against nutrition in favor of drugs, because Medscape is basically an advertising platform for drugs. They try to make it look like news. But the way that it's not news is that virtually everything turns out to be anti-nutrition and pro-drug, and that's how you know that it's a biased platform in favor of drugs and against nutrition. So again, in 2018, things started just going off the rails, and she's part of the reason that things started going off the rails. So here in 2018, she was the lead author on this Viewpoint, Vitamin and Minerals Supplements, What Clinicians Need to Know. Again, this was published in JAMA 2018. It's only 2 pages. So that starts, before they even launched this article, you already know it's bullshit, because no one, actually it probably would be possible, but someone would have to be a really, really high-level expert to write a review of all nutrients and vitamins in 2 pages. That would require a level of expertise. I dare say that I could do it, but I don't know if I could do it. I don't know if that's even possible. I just don't know. But she sure as hell can't do it. So again, going back to this thing on Medscape, she describes herself as as a director of the vitamin D and omega-3 vital studies. See, when I saw that, I thought, wow, I remember those studies. I looked at them and I reviewed them, and they were the biggest pieces of garbage that I'd ever seen published. So she is, the name and the face behind this avalanche of garbage research. So that's who she is. The largest randomized clinical trial in the world? The largest randomized clinical trial in the world? Oh my God, this is already getting painful. I'm often asked, how much vitamin D do we need? No one in their right mind would ask her that question. And should I take a vitamin D supplement? So she's the lead author, according to her, on the biggest clinical trial in the world. I can hardly believe that. The largest randomized clinical trial in the world? And it's just a steaming pile of bullshit coming to you live out of Harvard Medical School. All right, so I realize I ramble a little bit, but my rambles, that's because I'm doing this spontaneously. You can't possibly, or you could possibly, but you shouldn't possibly. You should not think that she's sitting in front of this camera spontaneously. I'm quite sure that whatever she's about to say has already been reviewed internally. They've approved it, they've edited it, they've told her what she's going to say and what she's not going to say. I'm a dude that went to the farmer's market this morning. I went to the farmer's market, we ran some errands. I tried to go shoot my guns, but it was raining too much, so I didn't get to go shoot my guns. This is me, totally spontaneous. My office staff is me, I've got no affiliation. I've got zero affiliations. I'd like to have an academic affiliation, but we've relocated and we were, living in Europe for 8 years. And during a lot of that time, I didn't even have permission to work, so I couldn't have worked. So anyway, I don't have any affiliations right now. Everybody knows I love to teach, so this is my way of teaching. But, here again, I am, doing this totally spontaneously. Everything she's said, everything she's going to say in this little video thing, it's been edited, reviewed, approved by whoever her bosses are. Or maybe she is so good at self-filtering that they just trust her to self-filter. But I don't filter. If I'm doing like a really high level CME presentation, or if I'm teaching, real students, then obviously, I try to be professional. I try to keep it clean. But if I'm doing a video on my own platform, on my own time, on my own Saturday, after we've been reined in for the last 2 days and I didn't get to go shoot my guns yesterday or today, and I'm a little kind of pent up, this is what it's going to look like. All right, so let's watch what she says. I've already couched it. And again, I'm not trying to say anything bad about her. I'm just relaying the data that I've seen. What I've seen is that her research is horrible. I have reviewed it independent of her name or her affiliations, and my review of her work is that it's just garbage. And so let's see what she has to say now. This is some of the worst research that's ever been published in the world of nutrition. It's just some of the worst. It's some of the worst I've ever seen. And so she's responsible for that. So here's another thing that I noticed when I was trying to do a little bit of prep work for this, which was very minimal. I've been busy doing other things all day. But again, I do recall well enough, because I did review this work back in 2018, 2019. These were the so-called fish oil studies where they used olive oil as the placebo. That shows you, without any question, that shows you what their intention was. What their intention was right out of the gate, sorry, I'm trying to make that the right size for the screen. What their intention was right out of the gate was to make fish oil look ineffective. So here's what happened in 2018, 2019. Several meta-analyses were published. They were all bullshit, where they compared fish oil against olive oil. So the reason that that's not a good study design is that fish oil and olive oil are both anti-inflammatory and cardioprotective. And they were looking for inflammatory markers and cardiovascular risk among people taking fish oil, and they used a low dose of fish oil to make it ineffective, or placebo. Here's the point that I want to make very clear. And when I say this, this is going to become very obvious to you very fast. But it's not obvious to most people who read research. But when I say it, you're going to say, well, of course, it should be that way. And the of course is this. Placebos are meant to mask within a clinical trial for the doctors and participants, but especially the subjects. It's to mask who's getting treated and who's not. That masking should stop when the article gets published. If they publish an article and they're still calling something a placebo, at that point it's inappropriate to continue using the word placebo. The reason it's inappropriate is because the purpose of publishing research is so that that research can be critiqued and duplicated. If they keep using the term placebo within their own research, it's because they're trying to hide the identity of that placebo. In this case, they didn't say the name of the placebo. They didn't tell you the identity of the placebo, even in the published research articles. Like, for example, look at this. Another article published in JAMA. This was 2019. Again, this lady, Joanne Manson, she's the final author, which actually sometimes means she's the lead author. But they're still calling it a placebo. That's inappropriate in a published research article because at that point, you're supposed to identify what your placebo is so that other researchers can evaluate the quality of the research and maybe even duplicate it. But what they did is and this has become common within the last 8 years or so. Before the last 8 years, when medicine started to go off the rails, this practice didn't exist. And that is, they publish the research, and then they'll say, oh, well, we had so much more data, we have to publish that in supplemental materials that we'll make available online in a separate archive. And that's where they revealed the identity of their placebo. The placebo was olive oil. See, they don't want to tell doctors the truth in their research publications. So when they publish something in JAMA that's going to go out to news agencies and millions of doctors, they don't want to tell people because they know that most doctors won't look it up. And so they can say, look, it was fish oil against placebo. It was a placebo-controlled, randomized, double-blind, multi-center study. I mean, that's the gold standard, so to speak. But they're hiding the identity of the placebo because anybody who knows anything about nutrition and cardiovascular disease would have said, well, that's a bullshit placebo. You're using two items, both of which are anti-inflammatory and cardioprotective, in order to blur the distinction between those two. The goal of a study design like this is to make fish oil look ineffective. They use low-dose fish oil against a modest dose of olive oil. So the distinction, instead of being like this, is going to be very neck and neck. Both groups may receive cardioprotective benefits, but the distinction will be very minimal so that the conclusion can then say, oh, well, there was no statistical difference between the groups. So that's the kind of research that this person publishes. So let's dive into what she says, and I'll see if I need to repeat myself again, but probably not. Let me just see if there's anything else right in front of me. So she's the author of this level of garbage research. Also, obviously, they used vitamin D at 2,000 international units. At best, that's half of the requirement. So this was published in 2019. In 2003, so that's 16 years ago, or more. Sorry, I said that wrong. It's not 16 years ago, it's 19 years ago. 2003 says right now we're in 2022. So 19 years ago, the requirement for vitamin D in adults was established to be between 3,000 and 5,000. So let's call it 4,000. In 2004, which was 18 years ago, is when I published my paper on vitamin D saying, hey, we need to be giving all adults 4,000 international units per day. I also described, it was a really good article, and I must say so. I also gave in that article kind of a subsection that was criteria for doing research and evaluating research. And again, I said that 4,000 is the minimum, and then of course we have to measure serum levels. to make sure that serum levels are somewhat optimized. Anyway, so this group of researchers led by this Manson researcher person, they're at least 18 or 19 years behind the times if they're using 2,000 units. So again, they use 2,000 units. They'll say that it's high dose vitamin D, and of course it's not. It's not even half of the requirement. So other articles have said that the requirement should be closer to 10,000 international units, which is about 10 minutes of sunshine, 10 or 15 minutes of sunshine. Is that physiologically reasonable? Totally. Is 2,000 reasonable? Probably not. Sorry, I might drink one more time of this. So her fish oil research is bogus. Her vitamin D research is bogus. So let's see what she has to say about vitamin D. I'll do my best to not lose it.
Hello, this is Dr. Joanne Manson, Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School and Brigham and Women's Hospital. I'd like to talk with you about the recent research, particularly randomized clinical trials of vitamin D supplementation and the implications for clinical practice. As a director of the vitamin D and omega-3 trial, VITAL, largest randomized clinical trial in the world, I'm often asked, how much vitamin D do we need, and should I take a vitamin D supplement? And I want to review the findings from the randomized clinical trials and, again, the implications for practice. Now, for a long time, vitamin D has been perceived as a magic supplement, a magic bullet.
So, no surprise, but she starts in with this bullshit rhetoric about how vitamin D is supposedly a magic bullet. I mean, look, I've written many articles on vitamin D. I'm obviously quite knowledgeable about it. And I mean, I would never describe vitamin D as a magic bullet because it's a stupid thing to say. So, why would she start her entire presentation on something so stupid? She's using a logical fallacy. So for those of you who have either studied logical fallacies or watched my video on logical fallacies, she is using a logical fallacy right now. Let's figure out which one it is. It's kind of like a straw man. It's a kind of a hybrid fallacy, but for the most part, let's just say it's probably best linked to the straw man argument. So straw man fallacy is to misrepresent someone else's argument so then you can shoot it down. So she's misrepresenting the arguments in favor of vitamin D by overinflating them, and then she's going to say, oh, well, let's come back. So she's going to misrepresent the opposition, so to speak, so that then she can make herself look like the grounded and reasonable person. So that's the fallacy technique that she's using.
A panacea and a cure-all for so many chronic health conditions: cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, bone fractures, cognitive decline, depression. Many of the findings, though, have been from observational studies where a higher blood level of vitamin D, 25-hydroxy-D, has been linked to a lower risk of these health conditions. And we do know in epidemiology that correlation doesn't prove causation. There could be other.
I hate that. I hate the misuse of that argument. So the argument that she just made is a common one, and it's on some level it's true. Correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation. Fucking really? I mean, that's really low-hanging fruit for somebody who works at Harvard, some elite school, and they're all fake elite schools. I mean, they're whatever. For somebody who works at some elite school with 2 doctorate degrees, she is strategically picking very low-hanging fruit for the introduction of her topic. I mean, if she's an expert on this topic, go for the big stuff. Go for the stuff that's accurate. We don't need to waste our time on innuendo and straw man fallacy. And now she's going for more low-hanging fruit about correlation doesn't prove causation. Really, thanks. I mean, she's kind of talking down to people at that level. Uh, correlation, I guess the irony in a sense is this: correlation is usually causation. So she's saying, "Oh, well, you can't prove causality just because of correlation." Well, yeah, a lot of times you can. That's why things correlate, is because they are connected. Now, the distinction the higher level distinction that's worth drawing is, what is the nature of that causative relationship? Is it direct? So A causes B, maybe B causes A, or maybe C causes A and B, or maybe D causes A and prevents the ending of B, so to speak, which therefore makes B look like it's being encouraged or supported, when in fact it's just being non-terminated. So, I mean, there are a lot of ways to look at these relationships, but they usually are causal relationships. We just have to determine the nature of that causality. So, anyway, again, she's picking some really low-hanging fruit that I think is actually probably pretty effective at fooling most people, including most doctors, who haven't given 5 minutes worth of time to think about logical fallacies and rhetoric, which is what she's implementing. And that's exactly what you would expect. You would expect somebody who's got a job at Harvard and who publishes bogus research, you would expect them to be good at rhetoric. That's why they have their job. It's not because she's a nutrition expert, because a real nutrition expert would never use 2,000 international units in a human clinical trial, especially the biggest clinical trial in the world. They would never use 2,000 international units of vitamin D in a study like that. And they would never, a legitimate scientist would never use in an American population, they would never use fish oil against a quote unquote placebo, which happens to be olive oil. That would never, I mean, that's a clinical trial set up to fail, and that's what she does.
Factors such as people who have higher blood levels of vitamin D may have a healthier diet, or they may be spending more time outdoors getting sun exposure, but also being physically active. And some of these other factors could be lowering their risk. And then when the randomized trials began to emerge, many of these large scale trials, the findings were generally neutral or.
Yeah, well, see, she's the reason why the findings are neutral. Maybe I'll go back just for a second, just so I can catch that, what she says.
The findings were generally neutral.
She's the reason why the findings are neutral, because they use low doses of vitamin D. So we know that the physiologic requirement in adults is 4,000 units, sometimes 10,000 units, depending on the body mass of that individual. So between 4 and 10,000, she used 2,000 in her studies. Then, so that neutralized any benefit from the vitamin D. Then, to neutralize the benefit from the fish oil, they compared it with olive oil, which is also anti-inflammatory and cardioprotective. Boom. I mean, the reason for her finding of neutrality or kind of a null effect, so to speak, with her clinical trials is that she set them up to fail.
Or null for cardiovascular disease.
She just used the word that I used before I even knew that she was going to use it. She proved, the null finding or the null hypothesis or the neutrality of the intervention was proven by her poor research design.
Disease, total cancer, diabetes, cognitive decline, depression, and many other health outcomes, including even fracture. And so the question was asked, Does this mean that vitamin D is not important to health? And on the contrary, I think that these findings suggest that vitamin D is so essential to health that we need only small to moderate amounts of vitamin D.
That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. Uh, she's really good with rhetoric, though. I mean, and again, that's why she has a job at Harvard. It isn't because of her nutrition knowledge. It's because she's good at using the rhetoric that serves the elite institutions. And so that's why she has her job. That's why she gets published in JAMA, right? So she just, I don't even know if I want to talk about it, but she just used a really quick kind of inversion of language or inversion of meanings of terms. She gave a term that had kind of a dual meaning, and then she went with the secondary meaning so that she could say that you only need a little bit of vitamin D, even though it's essential. I mean, that's a skilled use of rhetoric. Because see, here's for those of you who are new to the nutrition and maybe jargonistic world of science. Essential, the term essential can have two meanings. One is you need it. Well, it can have three meanings at least, but the main meaning is that you have to get it externally because your body can't produce it internally. So essential means that it's essential that you get it from your diet. However, because most nutrients are required in relatively small amounts, essential also carries the connotation of being a very small amount. So you'll see how she used the word essential. At first, she connected essential with necessary, but then she switched it and she used the secondary meaning of essential, which is a small amount. I'm pretty sure that's what she just did. That's how it occurred to me. Let's go back and see if that's in fact what she did. I think that's what she did.
Vitamin D is not important to health. And on the contrary, I think that these findings suggest that vitamin D is so essential to health.
Essential meaning necessary, meaning you have to have it, meaning your body can't make it, so you have to get it from an external source like a supplement. Obviously, the body can make vitamin D as long as you're getting equatorial sun exposure in midday, which no one watching this video is getting that, right? So we could say that vitamin D is a conditionally essential nutrient, which most people meet the condition for that conditional essentiality. The conditional essential nutrient would mean that your body can make it, but in some circumstances it can't. And we all live in those circumstances. I mean, how much sun do you think? I was out all day today. How much sun do you think I got today? 0, because it was raining all day. I had a hat on. I've got long sleeves on, long pants, boots, whatever. So essential means, the first definition of essential means that you have to get it externally because your body can't make it.
We need only small to moderate amount.
And you see how she did exactly what I said she did. She switched it. So she starts off by using the first definition of essential, which is you have to get it from external sources, which would be supplements. And then she ends her own sentence by switching to the secondary definition of essential, or the connotation, I should say. So the denotation of essential is you have to get it externally. The connotation of essential is it's only a small amount. And she just switched it in her own sentence.
Of vitamin D. And vitamin D is very tightly regulated in the body, the metabolism, the function of vitamin D. So
Okay, she's wrong on that. She's talking about 125 dihydroxyvitamin D, and that is tightly regulated. But 80% of the activity of vitamin D in the human body comes from 25 hydroxyvitamin D, and that's really not so tightly regulated. That's a dose-dependent relationship. The more you take in, the more sun exposure you get, the higher your 25 hydroxyvitamin D levels are going to be. So when she says it's tightly regulated, like we got to be careful with this because we don't want to jack with a tightly regulated system, that's the argument she's trying to produce right here. And it's because she doesn't know. I mean, she's not that far behind the times, but let's just say she's at least 15 years behind the 15 to 20 years behind the times. So what she's alluding to right now is 125 dihydroxyvitamin D. What we know is that 80% of the activity comes from 25 hydroxyvitamin D, and that's not tightly regulated. That's a dose-response relationship, period.
So even small to moderate amounts will meet the requirements for vitamin D and bone health and many other outcomes. This is what
Yeah, well, bone health is bottom of the barrel when it comes to vitamin D. I mean, if you're talking, she's thinking rickets, she's thinking maybe a little bit of osteoporosis. I mean, she's not even in the game of modern appreciation of vitamin D.
the Institute of Medicine, National Academy of Medicine, U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, and many other professional organizations have reported and have advised that widespread screening for vitamin D deficiency and supplementation, widespread blanket universal supplementation would not be indicated. Now, the randomized trials of vitamin D, including Vital, have generally not shown reductions in the major health outcomes. We had two
Yeah, well, they were designed to fail. So this is somewhat of a circular argument. And I've noticed, and I guess maybe a lot of us are guilty of the same thing. But she, in particular, she likes to cite her own work. And she's kind of referencing her own work right now. She's saying the research doesn't find this, but it's her work. She's citing her own work mentally. I mean, her work is the research. And so when she says the research didn't find that vitamin D provided much benefit, she's the reason why the research didn't find much benefit, because they used only 2,000 international units. Let's see if she even talks about dosing. So right now you'll notice we're halfway through her video, or almost halfway, and she hasn't even talked about legitimate dosing. If she's gonna talk authoritatively on vitamin D from Harvard going out on Medscape to affect healthcare of millions of people, and she's halfway through her presentation on vitamin D and she hasn't even talked about dosing yet, that's a problem.
exceptions in Vital where we did see promising signals. We saw a reduction in autoimmune diseases, a 22% reduction in autoimmune conditions, including rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis. And we also saw a 17% reduction in advanced cancers, metastatic or fatal.
I mean, that's huge, right? I remember that. I remember seeing that now. So even with a modest or small dose of vitamin D, they still had, let's just say roughly, 20% reductions in autoimmune disease and a 20% reduction more or less or in cancer, right? That's huge. But let's see how she sweeps. I mean, that's huge. And then we'll see how she sweeps that under the carpet, because she wants to conclude that you really don't need to do much and you're probably okay and testing isn't necessary, and just forget about it.
Cancers. Now, the cancer findings have been seen in other or a signal for reduction in meta-analyses of other large-scale randomized trials, but even with very small doses of vitamin D, even with only 400, 800 IUs a day, we tested 2,000 IUs a day of vitamin D in Vital. So overall, I think the recommendations are that small to moderate amounts of vitamin D are adequate. Most people do not need to be.
She hasn't even defined what small and moderate. What's the difference between small and moderate amount? Is that 400, 800, or 2,000, according to her language? So this is a type of, I suspect, and obviously we haven't finished watching it, but this is a pattern again that I see in news and so-called science. It's not simply misinformation, but it's discouraging people from even thinking about it. So, like her apparent task in this video, and we'll see how it plays out, but the objective that I'm observing in her use of language is is hardly even to misrepresent the data as much as it is to discourage interest in the data, because she's kind of creating this big ball of mush that is so uninteresting, and it's her work, but she's presenting it in a way that's so nonchalant and so half-hearted that the goal of this appears to be to create indifference on the topic.
Be screened, or in the healthy population to be screened or to take supplements. Now, with the finding of a reduction in autoimmune diseases, there is a suggestion that vitamin D may play a role in tamping down.
You'll also notice the language that she uses when she's talking about a 20% reduction in autoimmunity is huge. I mean, you talk about millions of people, billions of dollars. I mean, it's huge. In the healthcare, if we're going to talk about global health, if we're going to talk about national health, if we're going to call this the biggest study in the world, which is what she called it, then we are obviously talking about huge population-wide implications, national and global implications of this work. Now, a 20% reduction is gigantic, but you'll notice the language that she uses around that. She just said, I think she just used the word suggestion. So it's a suggestion of X. Now, it can't simply be the suggestion of X. In the world's largest clinical trial, which is what she's trying to describe here, it wouldn't simply be a suggestion if the number is in the range of 20%. If it were a smaller finding, like a little bump on the graph, that would be a suggestion, but that's not 20%. That would be like a 2%. We saw a 2% suggestion of a reduction in autoimmunity and cancer, a 2% suggestion or a 2% signal. Okay, that's a 2% suggestion or a 2% signal, not a 20%. At 20%, it's not a suggestion or it's not a signal, it's a finding. But she has convinced herself, or she's put in this position because she's already been convinced, or her job depends on her finding something insignificant. And so her research was designed in such a way as to not find anything. But even when they found something, like a 20% reduction in autoimmunity and cancer, she's still minimizing it. She's calling it a suggestion. She's calling it a signal. 20% of a huge study is not a signal. It's not a suggestion.
Finding of a reduction in autoimmune diseases, there is a suggestion that vitamin D may play a role in tamping down inflammation. So the question has been raised, could vitamin D be a benefit for reducing severity of COVID illness, reducing need for hospitalization, reducing long COVID? We're actually looking at this question in a separate trial called the Vitamin D and COVID Trial VIVID, testing a higher dose of more than 3,000 IUs a day of vitamin D, and those results will be available end of.
3,000 international units for active COVID, that's just stupid. Yeah, it's better than nothing. But that's absurd. So it's another trial that's designed to fail.
This year, early.
And that's no accident. That is why she has this job. So she's placed in this position either because she's incompetent and they can trust her incompetence to produce this bullshit, mamby-pamby, melba-toast, mediocre, watered-down research, or they direct her to do so, through, advisory panels, or they say, the internal review board that's going to approve her research. So her research, she doesn't just make up her research. She may have an idea, she presents it to the IRB, the internal review board, sometimes called an independent review board, depending on where if it's inside or outside of the institutional review board. So she presents her ideas and they approve it or don't, or they, fine tune it or they make changes. So she is either expert at self-deception so that she deceives her data, her research methodology is kind of auto-deceptive, so to speak, or they do it for her. They say, no, Joanne Manson, sorry, but you can't come in here and do a study with 4,000 units. We need it to be 2,000 to be more conservative. So they may tell her, or they just trust her to do bad work, but that's what's going on here.
Next year, other randomized trials looking at COVID, vitamin D, the results have been mixed.
The competently performed studies have been positive. The incompetent studies that used late dosing, like 11 days after the onset, that's too late. That was also published in JAMA. So they used late dosing, low dosing, or bolus dosing. None of that's going to work. That's what she's referring to as conflicting data.
And inconsistent. So there really isn't a clear answer. However, during the COVID pandemic, I have been generally advising that it's reasonable to take 1,000 to 2,000 IUs of vitamin D just as a form of insurance in that.
Her recommendation has no legitimate basis. I mean, her recommendation for that dosage has no basis in reality. I mean, for an adult, 1,000 or 2,000, that's, where does she get that number? Oh, she already said where she got that number. She gets it from the IOM or from the U.S. Preventative Task Force or whatever. No legitimate vitamin D researcher considers those credible agencies.
That dosing is known to be very safe.
Yeah, it's safe because it's half or 10% or 20% of what's necessary. Of course it's safe. That's not the issue. I mean, that's a stupid statement. So 1,000 international units of vitamin D or 2,000, that's equal to like 3 minutes of being in the sun or 5 minutes of being in the sun. No one questions, I mean, that's not a safety concern. So the fact that she's justifying it by saying it's safe when in fact it's negligent underdosing.
Over more than 5.3 years. In the VITAL trial, we saw that 2,000 IUs a day was very safe. So this would.
Yeah, of course it's safe because it's either half or 20% of the physiologic requirement. Of course it's safe. That's not the issue.
Be a reasonable dose during.
Just because it's safe doesn't mean it's reasonable. The job of clinicians, the reason that people go to medical school and get medical training theoretically isn't to do stuff that's safe, it's to balance risk. So if we in medicine, or if we went to medical school and then tortured ourselves with hospital training, working 80, 100 hours a week for peanuts and getting abused and berated and mistreated and sleep deprived and all that stuff. That's not to learn how to do stuff that's safe. That's to learn how to balance risk with benefit. Doing nothing is safe. Well, not always, but, giving people half of what they need is safe from a therapeutic standpoint. And that's where she is originating her use of the word safe here. The distinction that someone from Harvard should be making if they've got an office and 2 doctorate degrees, the distinction is she's kind of confusing the topic. She's saying safe, but what she means is therapeutically safe or interventionally safe. The intervention is safe because we used half the recommended dose. Okay? That's what she's saying. But in clinical medicine, in clinical care, especially like urgent care and emergency care, or, like inpatient care, internal medicine, you can't just live in the zone of therapeutically safe all the time. You have to do what's clinically reasonable or clinically safe. And in that context, you have to weigh the risk of treatment with the risk of non-treatment. And so when she uses the term safe, she says that dose of vitamin D is safe. Yeah, that's therapeutically safe because you're using half or 20% of what you should be using. So are you going to see toxicity from that dose? No. But you're not going to see full benefit either. And so the use of the term safe, again, she's taking a term, safe, and she's using one of the definitions without considering, kind of abusing the other definition, which should be included at a high level conversation. I mean, come on. She's leading the biggest clinical trial in the world. She's got an office at Harvard Medical School. She's on Medscape. And she's not even differentiating this at a high level, right? So again, safety, I talk about this in my books, and my books were originally written for chiropractic and naturopathic audiences, right? And I do remember in one of my books, it may have been in the 2009 book, now I'm thinking about it a little bit more. So it's in chapter 1. I talk about how you have to make sure that your treatment is safe, but you have to make sure that your patient is safe too, meaning that you haven't undertreated or overtreated your patient. Right now, she's defining safety as avoiding overtreatment, like overdosing, but she's undertreating her patient population. That's not safe treatment, that's negligent treatment. That's low-level treatment. High-level treatment, and it doesn't mean you have to walk this line all the time, but high-level thinking in medicine and therapeutics is balancing risk and benefit, not avoiding risk and benefit. So in her clinical trials, she has avoided risk and she's avoided benefit because her doses are so low and her clinical design, her clinical research design is such that she's not going to find benefit, and she's congratulating herself for not finding harm, but she missed the opportunity of a lifetime, which was to conduct these studies appropriately and find massive benefit.
During this time period, but it's not essential to take a supplement. And overall,
so this is beautiful. This is beautiful. So remember in some of my other blogs, I talk about manipulative people and manipulative behavior and manipulative conversations. The easiest way to know when you are being manipulated or when I or any of us are being manipulated, the easiest way to find that is simply through inconsistency. And she can't even talk for 6 minutes or 5 minutes without being inconsistent. So she's inconsistent in her use of the term essential, and she's inconsistent in the proper use of the word safety, which has to include at least the two considerations of therapeutic safety, but also clinical safety. Under treatment may be therapeutically safe, but it's clinically risky, right? So she just now said, she had previously said that vitamin D was essential, and then she backtracked off of definition number 1 into, as I said, connotation number 2, which is small amounts. And now she's saying it's not even essential.
A reasonable dose during this time period, but it's not essential to take a supplement.
How can it? A few minutes ago, she said it was essential. The definition of essential in the world of nutrition is that you have to get it externally. So now she could be saying that you don't have to take a supplement, but you have to get it from food sources. So she better define what those food sources are if she's going to present that as her kind of polished definition of essentiality. So if she's going to say that vitamin D is either essential, and now she's saying it's not essential, so maybe she's trying to say that it's conditionally essential. She just said you don't have to take a supplement. Then where are people going to get this?
And overall, aside from some high-risk groups, most people are really not in need of a supplement. Now,
that's bullshit. 60 to 80% of the world population, especially in the Western world, the European world, UK, Ireland, United States, Canada, Australia, 60 to 80% of the population is deficient. And now she's saying that people aren't deficient?
And And overall, aside from some high-risk groups, most people are really not in need of a supplement.
And that's patently false.
Now, the high-risk groups include people who are in nursing homes and may have restricted diets and limited time, and limited, if any, time outdoors, people with malabsorption conditions such as Crohn's disease, celiac disease, post-gastric bypass surgery, and people with osteoporosis on medications for osteoporosis. Bone health problems is still quite reasonable, very reasonable, to be prescribed calcium and vitamin D for those patients. But our recommendations for the generally healthy population really should be focusing on having a healthy diet. The U.S. has a fortified food supply. There is vitamin D added to many foods.
It's vitamin D2, which is either half or 1/3 as effective as vitamin D3. So, here she is speaking to a global audience via this platform called Medscape, coming out of Harvard. I'm sure she's making huge money. I don't know. You know, $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 a year for this position.
It's dairy products and many cereals.
Oh, come on. You can't say, you cannot say that cereals are a legitimate source of vitamin D, especially if it's vitamin D2. What else did she say? She said cereal, something else plus cereals. Oh.
Many foods, dairy products, and many cereals, as well as beverages. And also there's some natural sources such as fatty fish and wild mushrooms. So we should be looking at the food labels, which now include vitamin D content, and trying to get adequate vitamin D from our diet, and also doing our best to spend time outdoors, being physically active, and physical activity is of such great.
I hate it when people say that. Telling most of the population that they need to be more active and get exercise outdoors in the middle of the day, that is such a socially privileged thing to say, right? So like if she takes her lunch hour outside, in the park, she has the right. Most employees, whether blue collar or white collar, don't have the privilege of going and spending an hour lunch, at a park in the middle of the day to get their vitamin D, okay? So putting that responsibility on the population when the population as a whole doesn't have that legitimate opportunity, that is such a, should we encourage it? We should at least mention it because it is the ideal, right? We want people to be aware of the ideal. The ideal is you should, and I wish that you did, and unfortunately you don't have time to exercise every day, spend time outdoors. Most people don't even live in an area that has a park where they could go to that's decent, let alone safe, where they could actually, take off some of their work clothes and get some full sunshine. It's a fantasy. So yeah, I would love for everybody to be able to live that life. That you should live in a sunny climate that's warm, where you can take off most of your clothes in the middle of the day while you're on your lunch break, and feel safe socially and physically and financially safe enough to do that. You're not going to get robbed or whatever. That's a fantasy. Should we promote that as the ideal? Yeah, the ideal is we would all like to have the life where we could go spend, the middle of the day at the park getting some exercise. But to put that on the population as a health intervention or as a preventive intervention and say, oh yeah, don't do any of that supplement stuff, just take your lunch break, take an extended lunch break every day, your boss won't mind. Shit, most people would get fired for doing that. So is it the ideal? Yeah. Is it realistic to tell most of the population, hey, take a 2-hour lunch or an hour lunch and go to the park and get your sunshine so you can get your vitamin D? That's totally unrealistic And it's supremely privileged of her to be able to even say that with a straight face, as if that's reasonable. Now, a reasonable way to say it would be to at least acknowledge that it's a fantasy for most people and say, I wish for you that on your days off or your weekends or your holidays that you should get some sun and get some exercise. That's what I want for you. That's what I want you to do. That's my want for you. However, since that's unreasonable, you need to take a vitamin D supplement on the days where you didn't get to spend half the day at the park. This is so perfect coming out of Harvard. This is so perfect that she would present that as something that she thinks that's reasonable. That is not reasonable for 95% of the population.
Time outdoors, being physically active and physical activity is of such great benefit to our health. So the general principle is that a dietary supplement will never be a substitute for a healthy diet or healthy.
Again, that's the straw man fallacy. So she just misrepresented the argument so that she can make herself look reasonable and at the same time shoot down the competition or the people who would present a different view.
The lifestyle and those other.
I mean, no one in the world says that vitamin D is a substitute for a healthy lifestyle. No one says that. So she doesn't need to clarify that as if she's doing people a favor by clarifying that. No one in the world is saying that vitamin D is a substitute for, exercise and outdoor time and having good relationships and not injecting heroin. No one is saying that. And then she comes along and says, oh, well, vitamin D is not a substitute for healthy lifestyle and taking your lunch breaks in Central Park and getting plenty of sunshine. She's trying to make herself look insightful and generous as if she's saying something insightful and generous. It's just Captain Obvious.
Behaviors really should be the focus at this time. Thanks so much for your attention. This is Joey Manson.
Yeah, that was exactly the complete disaster that I expected it to be coming out of Harvard. It was perfect. I mean, Medscape is great in the sense that they are so consistently stupid. A lot of the information that they put out is so consistently horrid. I can sit here and watch one of their videos with a clear mind and a clear conscience thinking, hey, let's just, I want this to be good. My prejudice based on my experience with these people, and I have reviewed her work previously, my experience based on having already reviewed her work is that it's totally bogus. And so she did me the favor of presenting a totally bogus review of her totally bogus research, which gave her totally bogus conclusions. It was perfect. I mean, I can't make it any better than that, nor do I need to. Here's another article that she had supervision over. Total disaster. Again, I reviewed quite a number of these. I'll try to mix these together and put it on the website, maybe even in the same video. I don't know. I could find them if I don't have the original files anymore, so I can't merge the videos together. But I'll see what I can do. I may be able to download them and put them together. So, wow, that was let's see. That was at least as bad as I thought it could have been, and maybe it was actually worse than I thought it could have been. But it was pretty bad. So I would have expected, the cynical side of me, let's say, the cynical side of me would have expected that coming from Medscape and coming from Harvard, that this was going to be full of rhetoric, double use of language and rhetoric and kind of terminology. So using a word with a specific definition and then maybe, as she did, introducing that context and denotation, and then subverting the conversation by kind of taking the detour and using the the connotation instead of the denotation. She did that at least twice. So she did that with her use of the term essential nutrient. She introduced essentiality as necessary, and then she took a separate route where she used the connotation of essentiality, which is small amounts. So she switched the terminology there. And then the other time that she switched terminology was she was talking about safety, but she was only using safety from the perspective of intervention, not from outcome. Because the outcome version of the word safety means you have to look at the risk of your intervention, but also risk of undertreatment. And if you looked at her data from the perspective of risk of undertreatment, it would be on fire with guilt for undertreatment because the vitamin D dose was too low. Their fish oil dose was also low, but they hid any benefit by using olive oil as a placebo. So yeah, that was exactly as horrible as it could have been. And so she kind of fulfilled all my wildest Medscape and Harvard dreams by being even more bogus than I thought she was before. So, here's the article that she published in 2018. I thought this was a complete disaster. I looked at the Vital study. I critiqued them in videos that were sometimes an hour long. So, I already tore up her research, not knowing, or at least not appreciating in the exact moment that I started on this review, not appreciating that it was actually her again. Wow, that was bad. But there it is. And so now you got to see how I spent my Saturday night. It started off great. Went to the farmer's market, got some great food. It kept raining and raining and raining, so I didn't get to go to the gun range like I had expected. Actually, I tried to go yesterday, but we got rained out. We got rained out again today. So I got to do this on my Saturday. And, there it is. You saw it kind of unfold spontaneously. And, on a certain level, I enjoy these for the exercise that they are. But, like I've said in some of my other recent blogs, I don't wake up every day dreaming of how I can criticize other people's work. If they do bad work and they publicize bad work and they dominate the healthcare landscape internationally because of their bad work, then yeah, I'm going to criticize it. And I kind of have the obligation to do that because I have some ability to read and analyze research. I do have that ability. I have worked to develop that ability. And so, from a Chomskyan perspective, meaning AKA the responsibility of intellectuals, I have some responsibility to use those talents for the benefit of the scientific world. So it doesn't just go completely off the rails. But, like Nietzsche said, and as I recently quoted Nietzsche in one of my blogs, the ultimate goal is to have a good world. It's not to have a criticized world. But sometimes in order to, to make a better world, we have to get rid of the crap that's in the world. And this is an example of she is responsible, apparently, because she said she's the director. So she is responsible. Oh, she is a director of the largest randomized clinical trial in the world. So she's responsible for producing this mountain of bullshit that has negatively influenced healthcare for millions of people. So she's responsible for that. And, the best I can do is say, hey, this is bullshit. It's all I can do. And therefore I am doing it, and I just did it. I've done it before. Her work is horrible. It's designed to find nothing. Even when they find something significant, like a 20% reduction in autoimmunity and a 20% reduction in cancer, they still say it's a suggestion based on a small signal. There is no 20% signal in the research world means it's kind of a small finding. It wasn't like a major finding. It's like a little blip on the radar. That's a signal. There is no 20% blip on the radar in a study so large as to be described as the largest randomized clinical trial in the world. So you can't find a 20% signal in a study that big. If it's 20%, it's huge. And so, she is choosing her path, which is to be noted or famous or servile or subservient to this particular paradigm. She could have chosen a different paradigm, which is to say, hey, we discovered a way to reduce the incidence of cancer and autoimmunity by 20% globally. That would be, some fruit worth aspiring to, not aspiring to a null finding or a neutral finding, which is the path that she has taken. So anyway, I won't repeat myself because sometimes I do that for emphasis or whatever, for emphasis or completeness or clarity. You can watch the video again, but I'm going to leave this hot potato where it is. This was a complete disaster, and she provided a disastrous summary of her disastrous findings from her disastrous research. And that is the perfect summary. Good night, everybody. It's still November 12th of 2022. I'll do a quick edit on this video and get it up on the website almost certainly tonight. Take care, everybody, and thanks for your support at healthythinking.substack.com, also inflammationmastery.com, also inflammationmastery.substack.com. That's the new page that I made, which is simply a politically correct duplication of stuff that I say on Healthy Thinking. So if you're on Healthy Thinking, it's going to have everything. And then when I want to say something that's really politically correct, like vitamin D helps alleviate pain, I'll put it on the other one so I can get traffic, so I can avoid some censorship, which apparently happens. Because when I look up my own name and my own research, I can't even find myself on the internet most of the time. I can find other people who talk about vitamin D, but I can't find me talking about vitamin D. So that's why, I sometimes have to set up different pages or different profiles or whatever. It's not because I want to have so many pages to manage. It's because I'm trying to get information out to people and not have it censored. So again, thank you very much for your support, and I'll get this on the web as soon as I can. Thank you much. Bye-bye.